Hey, what's going on? Welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be showing you my steps I take to trim a brisket. Alright, so this is a standard brisket that you could find at your local grocery store or your meat market. Some of the things that I would like to point out here is you want to try to select a brisket that is pretty even from one end to the other. This will help in the cooking process. The other thing that you want to do is you want to try to get a brisket that's pliable. If it doesn't bend pretty easily, that means that there's a lot of non-rendable fat in the brisket, which will make it whenever you finish cooking it, a lot of that fat's still going to be there. Okay, but for now, what you're going to try to do is you're going to try to get one that's pretty thick on the flat and on the point end, so that when it cooks nice and even. So I'm going to get this out of the wrapper and then show you what I do with this. Alright, so one other tip before you start, a couple more tips. You want to get a knife that's pretty sharp. You know, you don't want a dull knife. And the other thing that I've noticed is if I put a towel underneath my cutting board, it makes it that much harder for the cutting board to be moving around, which makes it easier for me to cut. Okay, so you have pretty much two sides to your brisket. You have the one with the exposed meat and the one with the fat cap. I'm gonna go over this section so that you guys can see what we do here. A lot of this fat that you see here is good. I don't want to mess with it too much, but you're gonna hear me say a lot of that the fat is not going to render. When somebody says that the fat's not going to render, that's another way of saying that the fat will not melt into the brisket, or it won't melt during the smoking process. So it doesn't matter if you keep this stuff here, it's you're end up going to have to get rid of it whenever the brisket comes out. Okay, so whenever possible, you want to always try to cut away from you, not towards you. But what I'm going to try to do is I identified there's always this one section that's like a thick fat. Again, it's non-rendable fat. So what I want to try to do here is I'm going to try to remove this section as much as possible. I don't want to remove meat, because every ounce of meat that you remove from this brisket is a piece of meat that you're not going to savor. But sometimes you do need to remove some of this in order to get some of the seasonings in there that you want to. So you just want to start off here. It's always easier or better, or it's always better to go back and remove more than remove too much all at once. So I'm going to start off here. I'm just going to kind of slice away from the body. And I don't want to go too deep, so I'm going to be conservative here. Alright, so you notice how all of that was fat? So that means I can maybe try to get myself another piece here. I'm trying to remove as much of the fat as I can so I can expose this meat right here. This is where I want my seasonings to go. So as you can see, a lot of this, most of it, 95% of this is all fat. Another tip here, guys, is you want to try to cut your brisket when it's as cold as possible, because the colder it is, the easier it is to work with. Once it starts to get into room temperature, then it becomes a little bit more difficult to work with. All right. So now that we have this section pretty much not flattened out, but removed most of the fat, I probably can go maybe one more. Again, this is not going to remove any of the fat on any of the meat that that you're going to be eating. So it's fine. Just don't go overboard here, because you might start carving into the meat. So the next step you want to do is you want to flip it over, And you're gonna notice there's two parts to the top. You have your fat cap here, and you have some fat right here. And we're going to flip this over this way. This one has the exposed meat pretty nicely exposed here. I don't want to mess with this too much. The meat is already exposed. When I do my seasonings, it will hit that meat, so I'm going to leave that one alone. But if you just kind of feel the brisket, you can feel that there's a section that's pretty tough. Again, we go back to the non-rendable fat, which is this fat cap right here. What you want to leave is about a quarter of an inch of a fat cap on your brisket, so that it can kind of moisten your brisket as you're smoking it. But some of this can be taken off, and again, I would start off very gently. I wouldn't go too far. What I'm going to do right here is I'm actually going to cut a strip here off to see where my meat starts and ends. I am going to probably end up sacrificing some of the meat, but it's better so I can see where we're at. I know I said cut away from you, but sometimes it's kind of difficult to do that. Alright, so as you can see right here, there's a big fat section right there. So I can be able to go ahead and square this off a little bit. And at the same time, know how much fat I can take off. I can feel, you can feel here that there's actual meat right underneath this. Right here you can feel that there isn't, so I can kind of go aggressive here. If you just kind of like use your fingers to feel around the brisket, you'll feel what I'm talking about once you get yours at home. So now here I know I have a good amount to work with, so I can be able to remove some of this. Grab the meat right here, wherever you're going to be put, that way you can get a better angle. You just want to be cutting away from your body as much as possible. There's times that you'll end up cutting towards your body, but away is always better, you know, prevent accidents. Now we're going to tackle some of this top part right here. You can feel this is just pure fat right here, fat that's very hard, solid fat. You can go ahead and get rid of some of this. You're starting to expose the meat a little bit more. You still want to leave some of that fat cap, so that's what I'm saying. It's one of those things that you just have to be a little bit careful with. Like, you don't want to remove too much of the fat on your brisket. And the reason I'm being very gentle with this is because this is something that I would eat at my, this is one of those, you're doing a brisket at your house, so you want to leave as much of the fat, I mean as much of the brisket on the meat itself, on the actual brisket itself, without losing a lot of that meat while you're trimming. But I normally don't trim. I just put it in the way it is, and then after it comes out, then you can you start removing some of that non-rendable fat. The only thing with that is that when you start seasoning your brisket, this thick fat cap doesn't allow for the seasoning to go into your actual meat. So that's one of the reasons why you would want to do this. If you're a beginner and it's your first time smoking a brisket, I mean, if you look at my other videos, I have other videos that deal with smoking briskets. You notice that most of the time, if not all the times, I don't trim any of the brisket because I don't want to remove good meat during the trim. But every once in a while, I'll just go ahead and I'll trim it so I can get a little bit more of that seasoning into my meat whenever I season it. Alright, all this section here, you can see there's some color. If you can see the color here compared to here, this is like a solid white, and the coloration over here is a little bit more on the red part, more on the red side. That tells me that it's going to be, the meat is right underneath the actual that little fat cap. So I don't want to take too much off of it, but compared to how it was before, I was able to get a little bit more even from one end to the other. I have a decent fat cap still on. It's about an eighth to a quarter of an inch right there, which is good. What some others I've seen do before, and this is totally up to you. I'm not going to do it because I'm going to lose a lot of meat. But on this one section of the brisket, you have your thick end right here. You have your thick end right here, and then you have your kind of tapers off coming down. What I see a lot of others do is that they'll cut right here just to make it all nice and even. But now I'm going to be removing about at least a pound to a pound and a half of pure meat there. So this is where your lean part of the brisket is, and this is where your moist part of the brisket is over here on the point. So if you don't mind a lean brisket that's a little bit on the burnt end side, then leave it here. If you would rather it be all uniform, you would give it a nice little cut here and give it a more of a uniform cut. But other than that, that's pretty much all. You don't, less is more on this one. It's better to not remove fat than to remove too much and remove some of the meat. Okay, so this has been the Smoking Beard. This is the way I trim a brisket whenever I do decide to trim a brisket before I season it. I have other videos that actually take you through the whole process of how I actually smoke a brisket. Please check out my other videos and like and subscribe. But this has been the Smoking Beard. Once again, thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys on the other side.